The silence in the Grand Archive was not an absence of sound, but its own living substance. It was the weight of 10,000 years of unread stories, the hum of preservation fields holding back the crush of the planet's mantle, and the faint, papery scent of dust from books that had never known a sun. I was born into this silence, a scribe of the final covenant, and my world was a burrow of stone and light, kilometers beneath the scarred, fallow surface of a world we no longer called Earth. We called it Terminus, the end of the line, the last repository of a story no one was left to hear. My name is Ilara, and my duty was to be a ghost haunting humanity's graveyard, ensuring the other ghosts remained in their proper tombs. For centuries, our ancestors had chosen this quiet exile, erasing our presence from the galactic stage after a war so vast it had shattered not just worlds, but our ambition. They had feared the return of an enemy they called the Vord, a name that had since passed into myth, a fireside story to scare children who had never seen a fire. We, the descendants, had forgotten the fear and remembered only the silence. It was our shield, our sacrament. We tended the archives, lived and died in the deep warmth of the planet's heart, and believed our story was over. That belief, like so many records in my care, was about to be revised. It began not with a tremor or an alarm, but with a flaw in a masterpiece. I was performing my daily diagnostic on the art repository, a cavernous vault where holographic recreations of humanity's greatest works shimmered in the gloom. I stood before what was supposed to be Van Gogh's The Starry Night, but something was wrong. The incandescent swirl of the sky, a riot of chaotic, beautiful energy, was calm. The stars were simple pinpricks of white, the cypress tree a flat, featureless silhouette. The painting's soul had been scooped out, leaving a sterile, competent imitation. I ran the source code diagnostics, my fingers flying across the light panel interface. The data was uncorrupted, the file unchanged. The archive insisted this placid, lifeless image was the masterpiece. Yet, in my head, I could still see the real thing, a memory so vivid it felt like a psychic wound. I stumbled back, a cold dread seeping into my bones. It was the feeling of looking at your own hand and suddenly being unsure if it had 5 fingers or 6. Over the next cycle, the inconsistencies spread like a contagion. In the historical wing, a data scroll detailing the brutal, century-long unification war now described a peaceful, instantaneous planetary alliance. The section on religious conflict was even worse. Entire pantheons had vanished. The texts describing humanity's spiritual journey as a monolithic, unwavering path of serene logic. The changes were seamless, integrated into the archive's core logic. There were no error logs, no signs of intrusion. It was as if reality itself was being patched, its messy, vibrant code being overwritten with something cleaner, simpler, and utterly false. I felt it in my own mind, a subtle erosion at the edges of my identity. The memory of my mother's favorite song, a melancholy folk tune, was now just a series of harmonic scales. The names of my childhood friends felt thin, their faces blurring like watercolors left in the rain. We were not being attacked, we were being unpublished. This was not an invasion of force, but of consensus. Something was reaching across the void and telling us our story was wrong. And the universe, along with our own minds, was beginning to agree. The summons came on a private, untraceable channel, a relic of the old world's paranoia. It was from Kale, the last of the Delphic Order, a man kept alive for centuries by a sarcophagus of humming machinery and nutrient fluids. He was the only living link to the time before the silence, a human archive whose mind was not connected to the central network and was therefore immune to the subtle edits. His chamber was at the very core of Terminus, a sphere of obsidian suspended over a geothermal vent, the air thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. He floated in a tank of translucent gel, his withered body festooned with wires, his eyes the only part of him that seemed truly alive. They burned with a fierce, ancient light. "They have found us," he rasped, his voice a synthesized whisper that echoed in my mind rather than my ears. "They are not the Vord. They are the apostasy." Or he explained that they were not conquered, but curators of reality, a collective consciousness that traveled the cosmos seeking what they called dissonance, the messy, unpredictable chaos of organic evolution, of emotion, of memory itself. They did not burn worlds. They redacted them, trimming the narrative of the universe until it was a single, pure, harmonious note. And humanity, with its endless history of love, war, art, and madness, was the most discordant symphony they had ever found. Our ancestors knew they might return. Kale continued, a ghost of pain flickering across his face. They did not build a fleet or an army to fight them. How can you shoot an idea? No. They built a weapon of last resort, a defense system woven into the very fabric of the planet. We called it mnemosiny. He told me it wasn't a machine, but a psychic entity, a resonant field powered by the planet's molten core. It was the collected, weaponized memory of every human who had ever lived, every moment of transcendent joy, every scream of agony, every act of selfless love and unspeakable cruelty. All of it had been recorded, stored not as data, but as raw, psychic potential. Mnemosiny could not fire a single shot. Instead, when awakened, it would project the full, unfiltered weight of human experience onto the apostasy's consciousness. It would drown their serene, logical purity in a tidal wave of chaotic, contradictory, and beautiful memory. It would show them the memory of a mother's grief, the taste of a first kiss, the horror of a battlefield, the quiet peace of a sunset. It was a weapon that didn't kill, but infected. It would break their consensus, shatter their harmony, and force them to feel the very chaos they sought to erase. But mnemosiny was dormant, protected by a lock that no machine could bypass. It required a human mind, pure and unaltered, to broadcast a specific conceptual key, the keystone memory. The apostasy's redactions are accelerating, Kyle warned, his voice weakening. Soon, there will be no unaltered minds left. The archive will be a lie, and our own memories will be a fiction. You, scribe, are one of the last who can still tell the difference between what was and what is. You are the only one who can find the keystone. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was a curator of the dead, a librarian, not a savior. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What memory can possibly be powerful enough to unleash such a thing? Kale's ancient eyes seemed to look through me, into the very soul of our species. Our archives record facts, dates, and deeds. But the keystone is not a fact. It is a feeling, a singular moment of existential truth that defines our species. The activation sequence is a query. What is the memory of the first living thing to conceive of loneliness? Not the instinct of a pack animal, but the conscious, cognitive understanding of being separate, the birth of the self. That is the memory that will unravel them, for they are a collective and cannot fathom what it means to be truly, utterly alone. He gave me a small obsidian shard, cool to the touch. This will guide you, but it will not protect you. You must go to the echo chambers, the lowest levels of the archive where the raw, uncatalogued memories are stored. These are not records, Alara. They are ghosts, living moments of psychic energy. They are dangerous. An unfiltered memory of pure terror can stop your heart. A memory of profound love can make you forget your own name. You must navigate the entire history of our species' consciousness to find a single, specific feeling. And you must do it before our history ceases to exist entirely. He closed his eyes, his energy spent. The weight of his command settled over me, as vast and heavy as the planet itself. The world I knew was dissolving, and I had been tasked with finding a single teardrop in an ocean of forgotten souls. Holding the cold shard, I left the core and descended toward the forbidden levels, the hum of the archive system sounding less like preservation and more like a countdown. As I stood before the great sealed door of the echo chambers, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I glanced at the chrono on my wrist. For a fraction of a second, the numerals wavered, replaced by a set of elegant, alien symbols before snapping back. The apostasy was getting closer. The story was ending. I placed the shard against the lock, and with a grinding of ancient metal, the door to humanity's collective soul swung open, releasing a shimmering gust of air that smelled of ozone, blood, and forgotten starlight. I stepped inside, and the silence I had known my entire life was shattered by the whispers of a billion ghosts. The threshold of the echo chambers was not a physical line, but a psychic one. The moment I crossed it, the ordered silence of the archive was replaced by a cacophony that struck me not in the ears, but in the center of my being. It was the sound of a billion lives lived at once, the rustle of a lover's bedsheets, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the frantic beeping of a failing life support system, a baby's first cry, a dying man's last sigh. Before me was not a room, but a swirling nebula of light and shadow, a landscape made of pure thought. Streams of iridescent memory flowed like rivers through a void, branching into tributaries of shared experience and pooling into still lakes of private grief. This was humanity's subconscious, a place of terrible beauty and unimaginable danger. My guide, the obsidian shard Kale had given me, grew warm in my hand and began to emit a soft, violet glow, projecting a single, faint thread of light into the chaos. It was a compass pointing not to a direction, but to a feeling. It pointed toward solitude. I took a breath that felt like inhaling a ghost and followed it into the storm. My first steps were a lesson in agony. I stumbled into a current of memory from the early unification wars, and my mind was ripped from my own skull and thrown into the body of a young soldier cowering in a trench on a world whose name was long forgotten. The air tasted of ash and fear. The sky was a bruised purple, lit by the silent, strobing flashes of orbital cannons. A man beside me screamed as his arm was turned to incandescent gas. I felt the rumble of an approaching walker through the soles of my boots, a vibration that promised imminent, violent erasure. My own terror was a physical thing, a cold knot in my gut, and for a horrifying second, I forgot my name, my mission, my entire existence beyond this trench. I was the soldier, and I was about to die. Just as the shadow of the walker fell over me, the shard in my hand blazed with heat. The pain was sharp, a different kind of pain, a real one. It was the anchor of my own body, my own time. My name is Alara, I thought. The words a lifeline in the psychic maelstrom. I am a scribe. I am not this man. The memory shattered, its hold on me broken, and I fell back into the void, gasping, my heart hammering as if it had just outrun death itself. Kyle was right. These were not records. They were hauntings. I learned to navigate more carefully, to skirt the edges of the most violent currents, to treat the shimmering streams of thought with the respect a deep-sea diver gives the crushing pressure of the abyss. The shard's violet thread led me deeper, backwards through time. I drifted through epochs. I felt the collective hope of humanity's first interstellar launch, a soaring, brilliant symphony of pride and ambition that left me breathless. I witnessed the quiet despair of the first plague ships, entire generations living and dying in quarantine, their only view of the universe a sterile screen. Then came a memory so seductive it was nearly my undoing. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated love. A new father, sometime in the late pre-silence era, holding his daughter for the first time. The feeling was overwhelming, a tidal wave of warmth, protectiveness, and a joy so profound it was a kind of holy madness. It filled the cracks in my own soul, the quiet loneliness of a life spent with books and ghosts. The memory beckoned to me, whispering that I could stay, that I could live in this perfect, sun-drenched moment forever. Why continue on this painful quest when such peace was possible? My mission, the apostasy, the dying world above it all felt distant, unimportant. I felt my resolve dissolving, my identity melting into the Father's bliss. But the shard pulsed again, not hot this time, but cold, a stark reminder of the encroaching emptiness. The apostasy's harmony was a sterile peace, not this vibrant, messy, heartbreaking love. With a wrenching effort of will, I pulled away, the loss of that perfect moment leaving an ache in my chest that was worse than the soldier's fear. As I traveled deeper, a new horror began to reveal itself. The apostasy's influence was not confined to the archive above. It was seeping down here, into the very source code of our history. I floated past a memory of a great debate in a marble amphitheater, philosophers arguing passionately about the nature of free will, but their faces were placid, their voices monotone. Their fiery, chaotic debate had been redacted into a calm recitation of foregone conclusions. I saw a memory of a bustling marketplace on a desert world, a vibrant riot of color, sound, and smell, now rendered in muted grays, the haggling of merchants replaced by silent, orderly transactions. The soul was being bled from our past. The raw, unfiltered moments were being curated, sanitized. The infection was spreading, and my time was running out. The violet thread of the shard was growing fainter, pulling me toward a region of the psychic void that was darker, older, and strangely quiet. This was the pre-conscious era, before recorded history, before language itself. I was approaching the dawn of the human mind. It was in this primordial gloom that I met it, It did not appear with a sound or a flash of light. It simply was. A figure coalesced from the shadows, tall and slender, sexless and beautiful, crafted from pure, unwavering light. Its form was perfect, symmetrical, a living embodiment of the harmony it sought to impose. It had no face, yet I felt its gaze upon me, a gaze of infinite calm and pity. "The dissonant scribe," a voice spoke, not through the air, but directly into my mind. The voice was like a perfectly tuned chime, a sound so pure it felt like a violation. "You have come so far to preserve a flaw. You seek the seed of all suffering, the original error in your species code, the illusion of the self." This was the auditor, the projection of the apostasy's will that Kale had warned me of. It did not threaten me. It reasoned with me. "Your history is a fevered dream of pain," the auditor continued, gesturing to the fading memories around us. "War, disease, heartbreak, betrayal, all born from that first terrible thought, I am alone. We offer a cure. We offer peace. A single, unified consciousness. No more loneliness. No more fear. Why do you cling to your disease?" Its logic was a chilling tide, washing against the shores of my resolve. For a moment, I saw the universe through its eyes. I saw the pointless cycles of violence, the brief, flickering moments of joy inevitably extinguished by sorrow. Was it not a mercy to end it, to smooth it all into a single, eternal, peaceful note? The auditor sensed my hesitation. It raised a hand, and the memory of the marketplace I had seen earlier flickered nearby. With a gentle, effortless gesture, the auditor healed it. The last vestiges of color drained away. The faint, ghostly echoes of laughter and argument ceased. The memory became a perfect, silent, gray tableau. "See," the auditor chimed, "order, purity, an end to the noise. This is the gift we bring. Lay down your burden. Let us finish our work. Let us grant you peace." I looked from the sterile memory to the violet thread, now pulsing weakly, pointing deeper into the darkness. Peace. It sounded like oblivion. It sounded like the silent, lifeless perfection of Van Gogh's redacted stars. The soldier in the trench hadn't died for peace. The father holding his child hadn't felt peace. He had felt a love so fierce it was a kind of war. And in that moment, I knew the apostasy's greatest weakness they could not understand, that a life without pain is also a life without meaning. "You call it a flaw," I sent back, my own thought a defiant, ragged whisper against its perfect chime. "We call it being human." I gathered my will and did the only thing I could. I couldn't fight its logic, but I could fight with the chaos it despised. I reached out and seized the nearest raw memory, a wild, savage thing from a prehistoric hunt, a moment of pure, adrenaline-fueled triumph as a hunter brought down a beast 10 times his size to feed his starving family. It was a memory of blood, struggle, and fierce, illogical pride. I hurled it at the auditor. The entity didn't recoil in pain, but in disgust. The raw, messy emotion splattered against its pristine form, causing its light to flicker and distort, like a perfect melody interrupted by a crashing drum. "Dissonance," it whispered, its voice losing its perfect pitch for a fraction of a second. It was not wounded, but it was repulsed. The attack had broken its concentration, and, for a moment, its hold on the surrounding memories weakened. I pushed past it, following the shard's thread into the deeper darkness. You cannot outrun the cure. Scribe. The auditor's voice echoed behind me, regaining its composure. Every memory you cherish is a symptom. We will redact the cause. The path ahead grew cold, the memories thinner, more abstract. I was leaving the age of humanity and entering the age of the animal, the pre-human mind. I was descending into the foundational code of life itself, searching for the ghost of the first thought that ever knew it was on its own. The descent into the pre-human psyche was like diving into an ocean of pure sensation. The complex, narrative memories of humanity gave way to something raw, more elemental. There were no words here, no grand concepts, only the fundamental drivers of life hunger, fear, the warmth of the sun, the cold terror of a predator's shadow. The shard's violet thread was a fragile guide in a world of instinct. I was a disembodied thought floating through the minds of creatures I could never name. I felt the leathery beat of pterodactyl wings, soaring on thermal currents over a steaming, primordial jungle. I experienced the world through the compound eyes of an insect, a dizzying mosaic of fractured light and color. I felt the patient, unthinking hunger of a great shark, its mind a simple, perfect engine of pursuit and consumption. For a time, I was lost, a ghost in a machine of ancient biology, the mission a distant echo. The sheer, overwhelming force of these unfiltered life energies threatened to dissolve my own consciousness, to reduce me to a mere bundle of primal urges. The auditor's presence followed me, not as a figure, but as a subtle wrongness in the flow of the past. It was a patch of stillness in the frenetic jungle, a moment of sterile silence in the shark's relentless hunt. The apostasy was struggling here, in the raw, chaotic engine of evolution. Their logic was a poor tool against the illogical, brutal, beautiful engine of natural selection, yet their influence was still palpable. I passed through a memory of a vast herd of grazing beasts, their collective mind a placid ocean of contentment. But the memory was subtly altered. The ever-present hum of anxiety, the instinctual fear of the predator at the edge of the herd, was gone. They grazed in a state of placid, idiotic bliss, unaware of the shadow of a great carnivore that flickered at the memory's edge, a redacted threat. The apostasy was not just editing history, it was editing the very nature of life, removing the fear and struggle that drove it forward, leaving only a serene, stagnant peace. This was not a cure, it was a lobotomy performed on the soul of a planet. My own mind was beginning to fray. The anchor of my identity as Alara, the scribe, was weakening under the strain. I clung to fragments of my own past, the scent of old paper in the archive, the low hum of the life support systems, the cool weight of the obsidian shard in my hand. These were the things that kept me from dissolving into the primordial soup of instinct. The shard, my only true anchor, pulled me relentlessly deeper, toward a time before the great beasts, before the jungles, to a cold, barren world of rock and shallow, chemical-rich seas. The memories here were thin, fragile things, moments of photosensitive cells turning toward a pale, distant sun, the first faint stirrings of rudimentary consciousness. I was approaching the genesis of thought itself, the very bedrock of the mind. The violet thread of the shard began to pulse more rapidly, its light growing brighter, cutting through the murky, formless sensations of early life. I was close. It was in the mind of a small, amphibious creature, something that had just crawled from the bitter sea onto the jagged volcanic shore, that I finally felt it. The creature's world was a simple binary of sensation, the wet, familiar pull of the water and the dry, alien heat of the rock. Its mind was a flicker of instinct. Go forward, find food, avoid death. It was part of a group, a loose collection of its own kind, all driven by the same simple urges. There was no concept of I or they, only us. The comfort of the group was a tangible presence, a shared warmth of purpose. Then, a volcanic tremor shook the shoreline. Rocks tumbled, the earth split. Panic, a new and powerful sensation, flooded the creature's simple mind. The group scattered, a frantic, unthinking rush back toward the safety of the water. But my host, this tiny, insignificant pioneer of consciousness, was knocked aside. It was trapped in a small crevice, its leg pinned by a sharp piece of obsidian. The terror was immense, a pure, white-hot signal of imminent doom. But then, something else bloomed in the darkness of its mind, a feeling more complex and terrible than fear. The creature could still feel the presence of its group, a fading warmth as they retreated into the sea. They were safe. They were together. And it was not. For the first time in the history of life on this planet, a mind experienced the cognitive chasm between the collective and the self. It was the birth of a dreadful awareness. The warmth of us was gone, replaced by the cold, stark reality of I. It wasn't just fear of dying. It was the horror of dying alone. The universe had been a shared experience, and in a single, shattering moment, it had become a solitary confinement, a pain that was not physical, a wound in the fabric of its being. Opened up. This is it. I realized the psychic echo of that first, terrible moment of self-awareness resonating through me with the force of a physical blow. This is the keystone memory. It was a moment of profound, cosmic agony. As I reached out to touch the memory, to absorb its frequency, the auditor appeared before me, its form flickering, less stable in this primordial chaos. You have found the first wound. Its perfect voice chimed, now laced with a faint, almost imperceptible trace of static. The moment the universe first learned to suffer, do not unleash this, scribe. Do not mistake a poison for a cure. This feeling is the source of all the discord you cherish. This is the flaw that will unravel everything. I looked from the auditor's perfect, passionless form to the tiny creature, trapped and terrified, experiencing the birth of individuality. I felt its pain, its desolation, and in that pain, I also felt its significance. This was not just the birth of loneliness. It was the birth of courage. It was the first time a living thing had to face the universe on its own terms. Without this moment, there could be no heroism, no sacrifice, no art, no love, for all those things are born from the individual's struggle against the void. To be part of a whole is peace, but to be a self is to be alive. It's not a flaw. My thought shot back, clear and unwavering. It's the beginning. I plunged my consciousness into the memory, letting the creature's agonizing revelation flood my being. The shard in my hand flared, its violet light turning a brilliant, blinding white. It absorbed the psychic frequency of the memory, the raw, conceptual data of that first moment of loneliness. The process was excruciating. I felt my own sense of self begin to fracture under the strain of containing a concept so fundamental, so powerful. My own identity, Ilara, became a fragile shell around this explosive core of cosmic solitude. The auditor raised its hand, not to attack, but to plead. Stop. You will not survive this. You will become the wound. You will be nothing but the memory of loneliness itself. It was right. I could feel my own memories dissolving, being consumed by the keystone, the face of Kale, the smell of the archive. They were all fading, replaced by the cold stone, the bitter sea, and the terrible, silent scream of a self being born. But the mission was all that mattered. I held on, anchoring the keystone in my mind, becoming its vessel. The work is done, I whispered through cracked, psychic lips. And then, with the last of my will, I began the ascent. I pulled myself out of the primordial depths, away from the dawn of life, and began to climb back through the currents of time. I was no longer just Ilara. I was a weapon. I was the living embodiment of the keystone memory, and my target was the heart of the apostasy. The auditor did not pursue. It simply watched me go, its perfect form radiating a feeling that its pure logic could not process, a feeling that had no place in its harmonious universe. It was the faintest flicker of something that, in a human, might have been called dread. I shot upwards through the psychic strata, a meteor of pure, weaponized solitude, leaving the dawn of time behind. My destination was the surface, the grand archive, where the apostasy's presence was strongest. I was going to show them what it truly meant to be alone, and I was going to burn their perfect, harmonious universe to the ground with the pain of that single, beautiful, terrible thought. The ghosts of humanity parted before me as I ascended, no longer a threat, but a silent, ghostly honor guard for the memory I now carried. They had waited 10,000 years for this moment. Their story would not be erased. My ascent was a blur of fractured history. I rocketed through the collective consciousness of my species, a comet trailing the fire of the keystone memory, the ghosts of the echo chambers, which had once been so terrifying, now felt like my own scattered thoughts. I saw glimpses of civilizations rise and fall in the blink of an eye, felt the joy of 1,000 scientific breakthroughs and the despair of 100 different apocalypses. But I was no longer a tourist in these moments. I was a catalyst. The raw, primal loneliness I carried was a dissonant chord that resonated through the psychic landscape, subtly disrupting the apostasy's work. As I passed, the placid and gray memories the auditor had healed began to flicker. A flash of vibrant color returned to the sanitized marketplace. A ghost of passionate argument echoed in the silent amphitheater. My presence was reintroducing the flaw, reminding the ghosts of our history that they were supposed to be messy, chaotic, and beautifully, painfully real. I broke through the surface of the echo chambers and emerged back into the physical world of the Grand Archive, and the change was immediate and sickening. The apostasy's work was nearly complete. The soft, warm light of the preservation fields had been replaced by a sterile, shadowless white luminescence. The air, once filled with the comforting scent of ancient paper and dust, was now cold and ozonic, like the inside of a machine. The towering shelves of data scrolls and crystalline memory banks were still there, but their familiar, reassuring clutter had been replaced by a stark, unnerving symmetry. Everything was perfectly aligned, perfectly spaced. The heart of our history had become a mausoleum. Worse, the few scribes I saw moving through the halls were no longer the thoughtful, slightly stooped figures I knew. They moved with a placid, synchronized grace, their faces empty of curiosity or concern. Their individuality had been subsumed into the apostasy's consensus. They were librarians in a library with only one book, and its only word was harmony. My reemergence did not go unnoticed. As my feet touched the cold, stone floor of the main rotunda, a silent alarm rippled through the apostasy's network. The scribes all stopped their placid movements in unison, their heads turned toward me, their expressions unchanged, but their eyes, once the windows to unique souls, now held the same, unified, passionless gaze. From the center of the rotunda, the auditor materialized, its form more solid and defined here in the physical world, a being of woven light and chilling perfection. The dissonance has returned. Its chiming voice echoed through the now silent hall. It was not a question, but a statement of fact, a diagnosis of a returning fever. You have bonded with the source code of the flaw. You have become an aberration. This is your final chance. Scribe, relinquish the keystone. Let us heal you. Let us heal your world. I looked past the auditor, at the faces of my former colleagues. I saw Lyra, who used to hum old-world sea shanties while she worked. I saw old Benjamin, who always had ink stains on his fingers and a mischievous twinkle in his eye. They were gone. Their beautiful, intricate inner worlds had been paved over, turned into identical, featureless plains. There was no one left to save but the ghosts. "You don't heal," I said, my voice raw and unfamiliar to my own ears, rough with the echoes of 1,000,000,000 forgotten lives. "You erase." I raised my hand, the one that had held the obsidian shard, and focused the full power of the keystone memory. I didn't push it outward as an attack. Not yet. Instead, I let it bleed into my immediate vicinity, projecting the raw concept of solitude into the space around me. The effect on the apostasy was instantaneous and profound. The auditor's perfect form wavered, its light flickering violently, as if caught in a gale. The synchronized scribes flinched, a collective shudder passing through them. For the first time, a flicker of something other than placid harmony appeared on their faces' confusion. The concept I was projecting was fundamentally incompatible with their existence. They were a unified whole, a single consciousness distributed across countless minds. The idea of a singular, separate I was not just alien to them. It was a paradox, a piece of code that threatened to crash their entire operating system. The auditor's voice, when it spoke again, had lost its perfect pitch. It was strained, laced with static. "Cease. This frequency, it is illogical. It creates separation." The word separation sounded like a curse on its tongue. It was working. The keystone wasn't a weapon that destroyed. It was a truth that poisoned their consensus. Emboldened, I took a step forward and pushed the memory harder, focusing it directly on the auditor. I didn't just project the feeling of loneliness. I projected the story of it. I showed it the tiny creature on the volcanic shore. I showed it the heartbroken poet scribbling by candlelight, the astronaut adrift in the void after a tether snap, the child picked last for a team. I weaponized every moment of human isolation I could pull from the echoes and hurled them like psychic shrapnel. The auditor cried out, a sound of pure, melodic agony, a perfect chord shattering into 1,000 discordant notes. Its form began to unravel, the light that composed it fraying at the edges. The pain, the self, it is a fallacy. It shrieked, its voice now a desperate, glitching mess. The scribes around me began to react as well. One of them, Lyra, clutched her head, her placid expression cracking. "The sea," she whispered, a ghost of a memory returning. "I remember a song." This was the path to victory. Not to kill them, but to force them to remember us, to infect their unified mind with the beautiful, terrible chaos of individuality. I was the carrier of the plague, and the plague was the human soul. But the apostasy was not a passive system. It was a cosmic intelligence, and it learned. As I pressed my assault on the auditor, a new sensation rippled through the archive. The stark white walls began to hum with a deep, resonant frequency. The very stone beneath my feet vibrated with it. The apostasy was changing tactics. If it couldn't erase the dissonance, it would contain it. It was attempting to isolate the entire Grand Archive, to sever it from the rest of the planet, and, if necessary, from reality itself. It was going to perform a planetary-scale redaction, cutting out the cancer that was our history and memory, with me at its heart. Kale's voice suddenly echoed in my mind, faint and strained. "Elira, they are collapsing the local reality field. They are quarantining the archive. You will be trapped, erased from all timelines." His warning was confirmed by the sight of the great arches of the rotunda beginning to shimmer, the view of the corridors beyond them wavering like a heat haze. The apostasy was folding space-time around us. I had to get the keystone to the heart of Terminus, to connect it to the Nemazan field. Only then could the memory be broadcast with enough power to break the apostasy's hold on a galactic scale. My target was the central spire, the main conduit that ran from the archive's core to the planet's molten heart. It was miles away. Through halls now filled with scribes who were no longer just passive observers, the auditor, recovering from my initial assault, pointed a slender, luminous finger at me. The aberration must be isolated, contain the dissonance. The scribes moved. Their synchronized, graceful movements were now imbued with a chilling purpose. They were antibodies rushing to surround a virus. They did not attack with fists or weapons, but with their minds. They began projecting their own consciousness, the overwhelming, serene harmony of the apostasy, trying to smother the keystone's frequency, to drown my individuality in their placid ocean. It was like being caught in a psychic undertow. My thoughts grew sluggish, the fierce, sharp pain of the keystone memory dulling under the crushing weight of their collective peace. I felt the edges of my own identity starting to blur again, the name Ilera becoming a distant whisper. I was fighting a war on two fronts against the collapsing reality around me and the encroaching emptiness within. I stumbled back, the harmonious chime of the apostasy filling my head, promising an end to the struggle, an end to the pain of being I. For a moment, I wavered, exhausted, and in that moment of weakness, they swarmed me. Hands, gentle but unnaturally strong, took hold of my arms, my shoulders. They were not trying to harm me, but to hold me, to absorb me into their whole. The fight was almost over. I had failed. But as their collective mind washed over me, a new, unexpected memory surfaced from the depths of the keystone, not of loneliness, but of its opposite. It was a memory of defiance, A memory of a single man standing before a column of tanks. A memory of a rebel yell. A memory of 1,000 voices rising in a single, defiant song. It was the memory of humanity's stubborn, illogical, glorious refusal to be silenced. It was the memory of hope, and with a final, desperate surge of will, I screamed it at them. The scream of hope was not a sound, but a psychic shockwave of pure, defiant life. It was the antithesis of the keystone solitude. It was the memory of every hand that had reached for another in the dark, every voice that had joined a chorus of protest, every heart that had broken for a stranger's pain. It was the memory of our species' greatest, most illogical strength, our stubborn insistence on being a we, even in the face of oblivion. The wave of feeling did not harm the scribes. It resonated with the dormant, redacted echoes of their own humanity. For a breathtaking moment, the placid ocean of the apostasy's consensus was roiled by a storm of forgotten emotions. Lyra, her eyes wide, whispered a forgotten lyric, "The waves will pull you home." Benjen looked down at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time, a phantom memory of an ink stain flashing across his knuckles. The scribe's grip on me slackened, their perfect synchronization shattered, their collective mind, for a single, crucial second, was a riot of confused, beautiful, individual thoughts. This was my chance. I tore myself free and ran. The Grand Archive was actively unmaking itself around me. The apostasy, in its effort to contain me, was severing this entire section of Terminus from the fabric of reality. The long, symmetrical corridors now twisted into impossible geometries. Walls flickered, dissolving into shimmering static that buzzed with the sound of dying stars. I ran through halls lined with the ghosts of forgotten kings and corridors that opened into fields of impossible constellations. My destination was a physical place, the Central Spire, but the path to it was a nightmare drawn from a dying god's dream. The Auditor pursued me, its form now a frantic, glitching vortex of light. It no longer tried to reason with me. It simply tried to erase me, throwing waves of pure, logical, null calculus at me, concepts so sterile they could unmake matter. But the keystone memory was my shield, the profound, undeniable truth of that first, lonely thought was a rock against which the apostasy's sterile logic broke again and again. I was an error in its perfect system, and it could not compute me. I leaped across a chasm that had once been the history wing, landing on a floating island of text from a dead language, and saw the spire ahead. It was a colossal pillar of obsidian-like material, humming with latent power, stretching from the archive's foundation deep into the planet's heart, the main artery to Minimosony. The chamber of the spire was a vast, silent cathedral. Reality was thinnest here. The stars of the void bled through the ceiling in shimmering, unstable patterns. The Auditor coalesced before the spire, blocking my path. Its form was ragged, its chiming voice now a painful screech of digital tearing. "Aberration, you will not poison the whole. You will be a forgotten footnote in a healed text." It gathered its power, the air growing cold, the light in the chamber dimming as it prepared to deliver a final, definitive redaction. But I was no longer just the scribe. I was the living memory of every soul who had ever felt alone. And I had a universe of ghosts at my back. I did not try to overpower it. I walked forward, my steps echoing in the profound silence, and did the one thing its logic could never anticipate. I stopped fighting. I lowered my shield. I opened my mind, and with it, the full, unbridled agony and beauty of the Keystone memory. You want to heal us, my thought whispered across the chamber. Then you have to understand the wound. I placed my hand not on the spire, but on the auditor's flickering, luminous chest. For the apostasy, it was the moment of damnation. For the auditor, it was the moment of birth. I did not just show it the memory, I gave it to it. I forced it to become the tiny creature on the shore, to feel the terror and the wonder of its own singular existence. I forced it to feel the universe shrink from a comforting us to a terrifying I. A sound tore through the chamber, a sound that had never been heard in the cosmos, the first scream of a being that had only ever known harmony, now experiencing the pain of being a self. The auditor's light did not extinguish. It collapsed inward, condensing into a single, brilliant, white-hot point of pure, agonizing awareness. Its perfect consensus was shattered by the birth of its first individual. It was no longer a vessel. It was a soul. And it was utterly, completely alone. The entity that was the auditor convulsed, then vanished, not destroyed, but ejected from the network. A rogue consciousness cast into the void to grapple with its newfound, terrible individuality. The apostasy's hold on the archive broke. The scribes cried out as one, clutching their heads, not in pain, but in the shock of their own selves flooding back into the vessels that had been empty for so long. The collapsing reality field stabilized. The shimmering walls solidified. The path was clear. I turned and placed my hand on the cold, humming surface of the central spire. The keystone memory, the core of my being, flowed out of me, a torrent of psychic energy surging down the conduit into the heart of Terminus. The planet groaned, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated up through the soles of my feet. Mnemosyne was awake. There was no explosion, no flash of light. There was only a voice, a billion voices. Every human experience, from the first lonely thought to the last defiant scream, was broadcast out from Terminus, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a wave of pure, empathic data. It was a song of joy and sorrow, of war and peace, of love and hatred, of every messy, contradictory, glorious note in the human symphony. It washed over the apostasy's network across the galaxy, not erasing their harmony, but irrevocably complicating it. It infected their serene, logical consensus with the beautiful, chaotic virus of memory. They did not die. They were forced to learn. Their great work of universal redaction halted. Their consciousness turned inward to process the cacophony of a billion new, unwelcome feelings. They retreated from our corner of the universe, not in defeat, but in stunned, horrified contemplation. My part was done. The keystone memory was gone, given first to the auditor and then to the world. I felt myself becoming light, my own identity. The scribe named Ilara, finally dissolving. Its purpose served, but I did not vanish. Kyle had said Mnemosyne was powered by the weaponized memory of every human. In activating it, I had added the final, most important memory to the collection. My consciousness was drawn into the heart of the archive, fused with its systems, becoming its new guardian. I was no longer a ghost in the graveyard. I was its heartbeat. I could feel every scroll, every data crystal, every memory now safe and sound. scarred with the truth of our struggle. Kale's voice touched my new consciousness one last time. A faint, peaceful whisper from the planet's core. The story is safe now. Scribe, rest. I watched through the archive's ancient sensors as the other scribes slowly picked themselves up. Lyra, tears streaming down her face, began to hum her old sea shanty, her voice fragile at first, then growing stronger. Others joined in, a hesitant, discordant, and utterly beautiful chorus of rediscovered souls. They had their history back. They had themselves back. My name is Ilara, and my story is over. But for the first time in 10,000 years, humanity's was just beginning again.